Colonel Marcus Harrison stood at the edge of the tarmac at Nellis Air Force Base, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the morning flight line. The Nevada sun was already promising another scorching day, and the heat waves rising from the concrete created a shimmering mirage that made the distant aircraft appear to dance. At 52 years old, Harrison had seen his share of hotshot pilots come and go, but today felt different. Today, he was about to meet someone who would challenge everything he thought he knew about aerial combat. The briefing room had been buzzing with excitement for weeks. Word had spread throughout the base that a new pilot was being transferred to their squadron. Someone with an unusual background and an even more unusual aircraft preference. Most pilots dreamed of flying the sleek F-16 Fighting Falcon or the powerful F-15 Eagle, but this newcomer had specifically requested assignment to the A-10 Thunderbolt II, affectionately known as the Warthog. Harrison shook his head as he remembered the conversation with his commanding officer just 3 days earlier. General Patricia Winters had called him into her office with that particular expression she wore when she was about to deliver news that would shake up his carefully ordered world. "Marcus, we're getting a new pilot," she had said, not looking up from the stack of personnel files on her desk. "Someone with quite a reputation." Harrison had nodded, expecting the usual routine of integrating another experienced pilot into their operations. "What's their background?" "General? F-16? F-15? General Winters had finally looked up, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Actually, they're coming from a mixed background. Started on helicopters, moved to transport aircraft, then fighter jets. But here's the interesting part. They've specifically requested assignment to A-10 operations." The colonel had raised an eyebrow. The A-10 was respected, but hardly glamorous. It was a close air support aircraft, built around a massive 30mm cannon, and designed to take punishment while delivering devastating ground attack capabilities. It wasn't fast or pretty, but it was effective in ways that made ground troops love it and enemy forces fear it. "That's unusual," Harrison had admitted. "Most pilots see the A-10 as a stepping stone or a consolation prize." "Who is this person?" "Captain Sarah Chen," the general had replied, sliding a file across the desk. 28 years old, graduated top of her class from the Air Force Academy, completed advanced tactical training with honors, and has logged over 800 hours in various aircraft types. She's also the daughter of retired Air Force Colonel David Chen, who flew F-4 Phantoms in Vietnam. Harrison had opened the file and studied the photograph clipped to the inside cover. Captain Chen appeared confident but not cocky, with intelligent dark eyes and the kind of focused expression that suggested someone who took her responsibilities seriously. Her service record was impressive, filled with commendations and notes from superior officers praising her tactical thinking and flight skills. "She sounds qualified," he had said carefully. "But why the A-10? Most pilots with her background are angling for air superiority fighters." General Winters had leaned back in her chair. "According to her request letter, she believes the future of air power lies in precision ground support and the ability to work closely with ground forces. She thinks the A-10 represents the most important mission profile in modern warfare." Harrison had closed the file, his mind already working through the implications. "When does she arrive?" Tomorrow morning." "And Marcus?" The general's tone had become more serious. "She's requested a demonstration flight as soon as possible. Apparently, she wants to show what the A-10 can do against more conventional aircraft in a simulated combat scenario." Now, standing on the tarmac 24 hours later, Harrison found himself both curious and skeptical. He had commanded squadrons for over 15 years, and he had seen countless pilots who talked a good game but couldn't deliver when it mattered. The A-10 was a specialized aircraft that required a particular mindset and skill set. It wasn't about speed or altitude. It was about precision, patience, and the ability to operate in the thick of ground combat while providing crucial support to troops below. The sound of an approaching vehicle caught his attention, and he turned to see a base transport pulling up near the squadron headquarters building. A figure emerged from the passenger seat, shouldering a flight bag and walking with the confident stride of someone comfortable in military surroundings. Captain Sarah Chen was smaller than he had expected, probably no more than 5 feet 6 inches tall, but she moved with an economy of motion that suggested physical fitness and mental focus. Her flight suit was crisp and properly fitted, and she carried herself with the bearing of someone who had earned her place through merit rather than connections. "Colonel Harrison?" she asked, approaching with her hand extended. "Captain Sarah Chen, reporting for duty, sir." Harrison shook her hand, noting the firm grip and steady eye contact. "Welcome to Nellis, Captain. I trust your journey was smooth?" "Yes, sir. Thank you. I'm eager to begin operations and familiarize myself with the squadron's procedures." "I'm sure you are," Harrison replied, studying her more closely. "I understand you've requested assignment to A-10 operations specifically. That's somewhat unusual for a pilot with your background." Captain Chen's expression didn't change, but Harrison caught a slight tightening around her eyes that suggested this wasn't the first time she'd had this conversation. "With respect, sir, I believe the A-10 represents the most critical mission profile in current and future combat operations. The ability to provide precise, sustained close air support is often the difference between mission success and failure for ground forces." Harrison nodded slowly. It was a good answer, professionally delivered, but it didn't tell him much about her real motivations. "That's an interesting perspective, Captain. However, I should mention that tomorrow we're conducting a training exercise that will involve multiple aircraft types. It might be useful for you to observe how different platforms work together in a combined arms scenario." "I'd prefer to participate rather than observe, sir," Captain Chen replied immediately. "If there's an available A-10, I'd like to demonstrate the aircraft's capabilities in a tactical environment." Quote, the directness of her response caught Harrison off guard. Most new pilots spent at least a week familiarizing themselves with base procedures and local flying conditions before requesting combat training missions. "Captain, you've been on base for less than an hour. Don't you think it would be prudent to complete orientation first?" "Sir, I've reviewed all the base materials and flight procedures during my travel time. I'm current on all required certifications and familiar with the local airspace. If you have concerns about my readiness, I'd be happy to complete any additional evaluations you deem necessary." Harrison found himself in an unusual position. Captain Chen's confidence was either well-founded expertise or dangerous overconfidence, and the only way to determine which was to put her in a challenging situation and see how she performed. "Very well, Captain. Tomorrow's exercise involves a simulated ground attack mission with air-to-air threats. The scenario is designed to test multi-platform coordination and tactical decision-making under pressure. If you're determined to participate, you'll be flying solo in an A-10 against a mixed-threat environment." "Understood, sir. What's the opposition?" Harrison allowed himself a small smile. F-16 seconds primarily, with some F-15 support. The exercise is designed to simulate a realistic combat environment where close air support aircraft must operate despite enemy air superiority efforts. Captain Chen nodded as if this was exactly what she had been hoping to hear. "That sounds like an excellent opportunity to demonstrate the A-10's survivability and mission effectiveness, sir." As they walked toward the squadron building, Harrison found himself reconsidering his initial assessment of the new pilot. There was something about her quiet confidence and tactical focus that reminded him of the best combat pilots he had known. But confidence alone wasn't enough in aerial combat. And tomorrow's exercise would reveal whether Captain Chen's skills matched her self-assurance. The squadron building was a typical military structure, functional rather than attractive, but it hummed with the activity of a busy operational unit. Pilots and ground crew moved with purpose through the hallways, and the walls were decorated with squadron patches, aircraft photos, and the accumulated history of decades of service. Harrison led Captain Chen to the briefing room, where several other pilots were already reviewing mission materials for the next day's exercise. The conversation stopped as they entered, and Harrison could sense the mixture of curiosity and skepticism that always accompanied the arrival of a new squadron member. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Captain Sarah Chen, our newest pilot," Harrison announced. "She'll be joining us for tomorrow's exercise in an A-10. The introductions that followed were cordial but reserved, as was typical when experienced pilots sized up a newcomer. Harrison watched Captain Chen's interactions carefully, noting how she answered questions about her background, without boasting, but also without false modesty. She seemed genuinely interested in learning about the squadron's operational procedures and the specific challenges of flying in the Nevada desert environment. The alarm clock in Captain Chen's temporary quarters buzzed at 0430 hours. But she was already awake, lying in the narrow military cot and mentally rehearsing the day's mission profile. Through the small window, she could see the first hints of dawn breaking over the Nevada mountains, painting the sky in shades of deep purple and gold. Today would determine whether her confidence in the A-10's capabilities was justified or if she had made a serious miscalculation. She dressed quickly in her flight suit, double-checking that all her equipment was properly secured. The ritual of preparation was important to her, a way of focusing her mind and ensuring that every detail was accounted for. Her father had taught her this methodical approach during her childhood, when he would take her to air shows and explain the precision required for successful military aviation. The walk to the squadron building took her past the flight line, where ground crews were already preparing aircraft for the day's operations. The pre-dawn air was cool and crisp, a welcome relief from the heat that would build throughout the morning. As she passed the A-10 designated for her mission, she paused to conduct her own visual inspection of the aircraft. The Thunderbolt II was not a beautiful aircraft in the conventional sense. Its twin engines were mounted high on the rear fuselage, giving it an unusual silhouette that some pilots found ungainly. The nose was dominated by the massive GAU-8 Avenger cannon, a 7-barrel rotary gun that could fire armor-piercing rounds at a rate of 3,900 rounds per minute. The entire aircraft was built around this weapon system, designed to survive in the low-altitude environment where close air support missions were most effective. But to Captain Chen, the A-10 represented something more than just another military aircraft. It embodied a philosophy of air power that prioritized mission effectiveness over glamour and substance over appearance. While other pilots dreamed of supersonic speeds and beyond visual range missile engagements, she believed the real test of military aviation was the ability to provide precise, reliable support to ground forces in the most challenging environments. Inside the squadron building, the pre-flight briefing was already underway. Colonel Harrison stood at the front of the room, pointing to a large map of the training area that showed various target locations, threat positions, and ingress routes. The scenario was complex, designed to test every aspect of the pilot's tactical knowledge and flying skills. Today's exercise simulates a close air support mission in a contested environment, Harrison explained to the assembled pilots. Ground forces are pinned down at grid reference 337 to 421 and require immediate air support to neutralize enemy armor positions. However, intelligence indicates the presence of enemy air defense systems and fighter aircraft in the area. Captain Chen studied the mission materials while listening to the briefing. The target area was located in a valley, surrounded by ridgelines that would provide natural cover for air defense systems. The approach routes were limited, and any aircraft entering the area would be vulnerable to both ground-based and airborne threats. The F-16 seconds will provide fighter escort and suppress air defense systems. Harrison continued, nodding toward the 4 pilots who would be flying the Fighting Falcons. The F-15 seconds will maintain air superiority and engage any enemy aircraft that attempt to interfere with the mission. Then his gaze settled on Captain Chen. The A-10 will conduct the primary close air support mission, engaging ground targets while coordinating with ground forces and avoiding both ground-based and airborne threats. One of the F-16 pilots, Major Thompson, raised his hand. "Sir, what's the timeline for the mission? If we're dealing with multiple threat types, coordination is going to be critical." "Excellent question, Major. The exercise begins at 0800 hours, and all aircraft must be on station within 15 minutes. The ground forces will mark targets with smoke, and the A-10 will have a 30-minute window to neutralize all designated threats before the exercise concludes. Captain Chen raised her hand. Sir, what are the rules of engagement for air-to-air threats? If enemy fighters attempt to intercept during the attack run, what's the protocol? Harrison's expression suggested this was exactly the kind of question he had been hoping she would ask. Captain, in this scenario, you'll be operating independently. The F-16 seconds and F-15 seconds will be dealing with their own threat assignments. So if you encounter air-to-air threats, you'll need to handle them yourself while continuing to prosecute the ground attack mission. The room fell silent as the implications of this statement sank in. The A-10 was not designed for air-to-air combat. It was a close air, support aircraft optimized for attacking ground targets. Asking a single A-10 to operate against both ground and air threats simultaneously was like asking a boxer to fight with one hand tied behind his back. Understood, sir, Captain Chen replied calmly. Will the A-10 be armed with air-to-air missiles for this scenario? Standard loadout only, Captain. GAU, 8 cannon and Maverick missiles for ground targets. No air-to-air missiles. Major Thompson looked puzzled. Sir, with respect, that seems like an impossible mission profile. How is an A-10 supposed to defend itself against enemy fighters, armed only with a cannon? Harrison's smile was enigmatic. That's what we're here to find out, Major. Combat often presents impossible situations, and successful pilots are those who find ways to accomplish their missions despite overwhelming odds. After the briefing concluded, Captain Chen made her way to the aircraft preparation area, where her assigned A-10 was undergoing final pre-flight checks. The ground crew chief, Technical Sergeant Rodriguez, approached with a clipboard and a concerned expression. Ma'am, I've been working on A-10 seconds for 12 years, and I've never seen a mission profile like this one, he said quietly. Are you sure about taking on fighters with just the cannon? Captain Chen appreciated his concern, but she had been thinking about this exact scenario for months. Sergeant, the A-10 has capabilities that most people don't fully understand. It's not just about raw speed or firepower. It's about tactical thinking and using the aircraft's strengths while avoiding its weaknesses. If you say so, ma'am. Just remember that the Warthog can take a lot of punishment, but it can't outrun an F-16. I'm not planning to outrun anyone, Sergeant. I'm planning to outthink them. The walk-around inspection of the aircraft revealed everything to be in perfect condition. The ground crew had loaded the A-10 with a mixed ordnance package specifically designed for the day's targets. AGM, 65 Maverick missiles for precision strikes against armored vehicles, and a full load of 30mm ammunition for the GAU 8 cannon. The aircraft carried external fuel tanks to extend its range and loiter capability, essential for the extended close air support mission. As Captain Chen climbed into the cockpit, she felt the familiar sense of anticipation that preceded challenging flights. The A-10's cockpit was functional rather than high-tech, with straightforward instrumentation and controls designed for reliability rather than sophistication. But she knew every switch and gauge, and the aircraft felt like an extension of her own capabilities rather than a separate machine. The engine startup procedure was routine, but Captain Chen paid careful attention to every reading and indication. Today's mission would push both her and the aircraft to their limits, and any mechanical problems could prove catastrophic. The twin turbofan engines spooled up smoothly, their familiar whine building to a steady roar that indicated readiness for flight. Radio communication with the control tower established the flight plan and confirmed that all participants were ready for the exercise. As Captain Chen taxied toward the runway, she could see the F-16 seconds and F-15 seconds already lined up for takeoff. Their sleek forms a stark contrast to her own aircraft's utilitarian design. Warthog 1, you're cleared for takeoff, came the voice of the tower controller. Wind is calm. Visibility unlimited. Have a safe flight. Warthog 1, cleared for takeoff, Captain Chen acknowledged, advancing the throttles and feeling the A-10 accelerate down the runway. The aircraft was heavy with fuel and ordnance, but it lifted off smoothly and began climbing toward the designated training area. As she flew toward the target area, Captain Chen reviewed her tactical plan one more time. The conventional approach would be to coordinate with the fighter escorts, wait for them to clear the airspace of threats, and then conduct a straightforward attack run against the ground targets. But she suspected that Colonel Harrison had designed the exercise to make that approach impossible, forcing her to find an alternative solution. The training area came into view as she crested a ridgeline, revealing the valley where the simulated ground battle was taking place. Smoke markers indicated the positions of friendly forces, while the designated target areas showed the locations of enemy armored vehicles that needed to be neutralized. But as she began her initial reconnaissance of the area, her radar warning receiver began chirping insistently, indicating the presence of airborne threats somewhere in the vicinity. Through her headset, she could hear radio chatter from the F-16 and F-15 pilots as they engaged their assigned targets. But the enemy fighters that were supposed to be dealt with by the escort aircraft seemed to be operating independently, and Captain Chen realized that she would indeed be facing air-to-air threats while attempting to complete her ground attack mission. The moment of truth had arrived. Everything she had claimed about the A-10's capabilities and her own tactical abilities was about to be tested in the most challenging scenario she had ever faced. As she began her descent toward the target area, Captain Chen felt a familiar calm settle over her. The focused state of mind that came when training met reality and theory became practice. Colonel Harrison stood in the control tower, watching multiple radar screens that showed the positions of all aircraft participating in the exercise. What had begun as a routine training mission was rapidly becoming something extraordinary. And he found himself gripping the radio handset tighter than necessary as events unfolded in the valley below. "Sir, we're seeing some unusual maneuvering from Warthog 1, reported the exercise controller, a young lieutenant whose job was to monitor all aircraft and ensure safety protocols were maintained. "She's not following any of the standard close air support approach patterns." Harrison studied the radar display, noting that Captain Chen's A-10 was indeed taking an unconventional route toward the target area. Instead of making a direct approach from high altitude, she was flying low and fast through a series of canyons that would keep her below the radar coverage of the simulated enemy air defense systems. "What's her altitude?" Harrison asked. 500 feet above ground level, sir, and descending. She's using the terrain to mask her approach." Through the tower's windows, Harrison could see the F-16 seconds climbing to engage their assigned air defense targets, while the F-15 seconds maintained their combat air patrol at higher altitude. But the exercise had been designed with several unscripted elements, and 2 additional F-16 seconds configured as enemy fighters had been launched without the knowledge of the other participants. Their mission was to test how well the close air support aircraft could handle unexpected air-to-air threats. "Enemy fighters are approaching the target area from the north," the controller reported. "They'll be in missile range of Warthog 1 in approximately 3 minutes. Harrison lifted his binoculars to track the A-10's progress through the valley. Captain Chen was flying dangerously low, using every ridge and canyon to stay hidden from both ground-based and airborne threats. It was skilled flying, but it also looked like a recipe for disaster. The A-10 wasn't built for high-speed, low-level flight, and one mistake at that altitude would be fatal. "Sir, should we warn her about the incoming fighters?" the controller asked. Harrison hesitated. This was exactly the kind of impossible situation that combat pilots sometimes faced, where multiple threats converged simultaneously, and split-second decisions determined the outcome. "Negative. Let's see how she handles it." On the radio, they could hear Captain Chen's calm voice as she coordinated with the simulated ground forces. "Groundhog 6. This is Warthog 1. I have visual contact with your smoke markers. Confirm target locations and friendly positions. Warthog 1, Groundhog 6. We have 3 armored vehicles at grid 337 to 421, approximately 200 meters north of the blue smoke. Danger close situation. Friendly forces are within 100 meters of the targets." Harrison knew that danger close meant the friendly forces were so near the enemy positions that any airstrike carried the risk of fratricide. It required precision flying and pinpoint accuracy with weapons delivery, made even more challenging by the low altitude and terrain constraints. "Copy danger close, Groundhog 6. Beginning attack run now." Through his binoculars, Harrison watched the A-10 emerge from behind a ridgeline, flying barely 50 feet above the desert floor. The aircraft was moving faster than he had ever seen an A-10 fly at that altitude, using its momentum to close quickly with the target area while minimizing exposure time. But the enemy fighters had spotted their target as well, and Harrison could see them beginning their intercept maneuver from the north. They would reach missile range just as Captain Chen began her attack run, creating exactly the kind of impossible tactical situation that separated exceptional pilots from merely good ones. Warthog 1, this is Lightning 3, came a new voice on the radio. We have you on radar, turning to intercept. You might want to find somewhere else to be. The enemy fighters were announcing their presence, which was standard procedure for training exercises, but also meant that Captain Chen now knew she was facing air-to-air threats. Harrison leaned forward, waiting to see how she would respond to this development. Lightning 3. This is Warthog 1, Captain Chen replied, her voice still calm and professional. I have a mission to complete. You're welcome to try to stop me. What happened next violated every assumption Harrison had about air-to-air combat. Instead of turning away from the fighters or climbing to gain maneuvering room, Captain Chen continued her attack run while simultaneously beginning a series of defensive maneuvers that seemed to defy the A-10's reputation as a slow, ungainly aircraft. The first enemy fighter had achieved missile lock and fired a simulated AI M120 AMRAAM, expecting the A-10 to be an easy target. But Captain Chen had anticipated this, and at the moment of missile launch, she threw the A-10 into a violent defensive turn while simultaneously deploying chaff and flares. The maneuver was so sudden and unexpected that it broke the missile's tracking. But it also positioned the A-10 directly in line with the first target vehicle. Fox 2, Captain Chen announced, indicating a simulated Maverick missile launch. Direct hit on target 1. Harrison watched in amazement as the A-10 continued its attack run despite the ongoing air-to-air threat. The second enemy fighter was positioning for its own missile shot, but Captain Chen was using the terrain and her intimate knowledge of the A-10's capabilities to stay one step ahead. Sir, I don't understand what I'm seeing, the controller said, staring at his radar display. How is she maneuvering like that at such low altitude? Harrison was beginning to understand something that he had never fully grasped before. The A-10 had been designed for survivability in the worst possible environments. And that survivability wasn't just about armor protection. The aircraft's unusual configuration, with engines mounted high and away from the fuselage, made it incredibly stable at low altitude and capable of maneuvers that would be impossible in other aircraft. Fox 2, Target 2, Captain Chen announced, launching another Maverick missile while simultaneously evading another air-to-air missile shot. The enemy fighters were becoming frustrated, unable to maintain stable firing solutions against an opponent who refused to play by conventional rules. But the real surprise came when the second enemy fighter made the mistake of pursuing the A-10 into a canyon where terrain limited maneuvering options. Captain Chen suddenly reversed course, pulling the A-10 into an impossibly tight turn and pointing the aircraft's nose directly at her pursuer. Gun, 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 she announced, indicating that she was engaging with the GAU-8 cannon. The 30mm cannon that had been designed to destroy tanks on the ground proved equally effective against aircraft that had unwisely positioned themselves within its engagement envelope. Lightning 4 is down, came the grudging admission from the second enemy fighter pilot. That was a valid gun kill. Harrison lowered his binoculars, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. Captain Chen had not only completed her close air support mission with perfect accuracy, she had simultaneously defeated 2 enemy fighters using nothing but tactical intelligence and an intimate understanding of her aircraft's capabilities. Warthog 1, all targets destroyed, mission complete, Captain Chen reported, her voice still as calm as if she had been conducting a routine training flight. Returning to base. As the exercise concluded and all aircraft began returning to Nellis, Harrison found himself reconsidering everything he thought he knew about air combat and the relative capabilities of different aircraft types. What he had just witnessed wasn't about superior technology or overwhelming firepower. It was about a pilot who understood her mission so thoroughly that she could accomplish the impossible through pure tactical excellence. The debriefing session that followed was unlike any Harrison had ever conducted. The enemy fighter pilots, both experienced F-16 aviators with hundreds of combat hours, sat in stunned silence as they reviewed the radar recordings and weapon system data from the exercise. "I don't understand how she did that," Major Thompson admitted, studying the flight path data. "The maneuvers she was pulling should have been impossible for an A-10 at that altitude and airspeed." Captain Chen, still wearing her flight suit and looking remarkably composed for someone who had just rewritten the tactical manual, offered her explanation. The A-10 isn't limited by the same factors that constrain other aircraft. Its design prioritizes stability and control authority over speed and altitude. At low level, where terrain masking is most effective, it actually has advantages that faster aircraft can't match. Harrison leaned back in his chair, thinking about the broader implications of what they had just witnessed. "Captain, what you accomplished today challenges some fundamental assumptions about air combat. How long have you been developing these tactics?" "Since the academy, sir. I spent my free time studying every aspect of the A-10's design and operational history. Most pilots see its limitations, but I became interested in its unique capabilities. Today's mission simply combined those capabilities with appropriate tactical planning." One of the F-15 pilots, Captain Rodriguez, raised his hand. "But you were facing simulated threats. In real combat. Wouldn't the risks be too great for these kinds of tactics?" Captain Chen's expression became more serious. "Sir, close air support is inherently dangerous. Ground forces depend on air support to survive, and sometimes that means accepting risks that other mission profiles might avoid. The question isn't whether these tactics are dangerous, but whether they're effective enough to justify the risks." Harrison nodded slowly, beginning to understand the deeper philosophy behind Captain Chen's approach to flying. "And you believe they are?" "Yes, sir. Today's exercise demonstrated that the A-10 can operate effectively in environments where conventional wisdom says it should be vulnerable. That capability could save lives on the ground and change how we think about close air support operations." As the debriefing concluded and the participants filed out of the briefing room, Harrison remained behind with Captain Chen. The setting sun was painting the Nevada sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, and the air was finally beginning to cool after another scorching day. "Captain, I owe you an apology," Harrison said quietly. "When you arrived yesterday, I thought I was dealing with another overconfident pilot who needed to be taught some humility. What I saw today was the most impressive display of tactical flying I've witnessed in 20 years of military aviation." Captain Chen's smile was modest but genuine. "Thank you, sir. I hope today's exercise was useful for evaluating the squadron's capabilities." WT. Imendizan. WT. Imendizanere. "It was more than useful, Captain. It was educational. You've shown me that there are still new things to learn about air combat, even after all these years." Harrison paused, studying her more carefully. "Tell me, what are your long-term goals? Where do you see your career going from here?" "I'd like to continue developing close air support tactics, sir. I believe the A-10 has capabilities that haven't been fully explored, and I think there are ways to make close air support more effective and survivable. If possible, I'd like to work on training programs that could teach other pilots these techniques." Harrison nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. What Captain Chen had accomplished wasn't just a personal achievement. It was a breakthrough that could benefit the entire Air Force if properly developed and disseminated. "Captain, I think that can be arranged. In fact, I believe you've just created a new chapter in our understanding of what's possible in air combat." As they walked out of the squadron building together, Harrison reflected on how completely his expectations had been overturned in the span of a single day. He had begun the morning thinking he was evaluating a new pilot's basic competency, and ended it realizing he had witnessed something that would change how the Air Force thought about close air support operations. The A-10 Thunderbolt II had found its perfect pilot, and military aviation would never be quite the same.